Now at the Poco F4 launch, when this smartphone was whipped out and waggled about on stage, I got to admit I was a teeny bit worried at just how similar it sounded to last year's Poco F3. I mean, the F3 was bloody brilliant, one of the best mid-range mobiles of its time, but Poco seems to be leaning particularly hard into the if it ain't broke then don't fix it mantra with this 2022 update, even relying on the exact same Snapdragon chipset to run the show. So to see if it is a worthy purchase, I've had my SIM slapped in there for over a week now, testing it out as my full-time phone. So here's my in-depth Poco F4 review, and for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! Now this year's model is yet another 6.7-inch heifer, although this time those edges are flat rather than curved. I'm not really sure why flat-edged phones are so in style, because personally I don't find it quite as palm-pleasing. Definitely seems like a bit of a step backwards as far as the design goes, but it's a minor grumble at best. The Poco F4 also rocks a glossy finish around the back end rather than a frosted design like the F3, and again this feels like a bit of a downgrade as the shiny surface gets proper minging after you've just fondled it for a couple of minutes. Although hey, you can always use that back end as a makeshift mirror to check for any egregious nose hairs before embarking on some social venture. Bloody hell, it's like Jurassic Park in there. I have to bust out the hedge trimmers again. And I've got to say, this black colour choice isn't particularly stimulating, so it is good that Poco also offers the F4 in green as well as silver. And so far, that Gorilla Glass 5 screen has held up pretty well despite the fact I've been a total dick to it. I've been shoving this phone into the same pocket as other phones and keys and all kinds of other scratchy bits, and so far, touch wood, only a couple of teeny tiny, very light nicks on that thing. And the final retail model should come with a pre-installed screen protector as well, so no worries. And I can't spy any scars on the arse end or the plastic edging either. So far this phone has survived pretty much intact. I would have liked some proper dedicated water resistance, bit of IP rating for extra reassurance, but this thing is fine in the rain, absolutely no worries if it gets a bit of a splashing, just don't drop it in your pint. Android 12 is the OS of choice with Xiaomi's MiUI 13 launcher drizzled on top. And this doesn't bugger about with the UI too much, adding in some bonus features like the control center without removing much of the good stuff. The likes of the security app, well worth a gander, allowing you to block any nuisance callers and anyone else that you just don't really like very much. You've also got an auto scan option for any downloads to make sure there's no nasty virus types lurking within. Got the likes of the game turbo feature, which I'll bang on about in a bit. And overall, gotta say MiUI has behaved itself remarkably well here on the Poco F4. I did find that the swipe gestures were strangely unresponsive for my first couple of days with the phone, but they're absolutely fine now randomly. I'm not really sure what was going on there. And no other real jankiness to speak of. I didn't even really have any issues with the notifications. Sometimes MiUI can, take a little while to pop up a notification when a message does arrive, because the app is basically hibernating in the background, just not knowing what the is going on. It often means you have to go into the app settings and lock them in place so they don't hibernate, but I didn't have to do that here on the F4. All worked absolutely fine. And apparently Poco is offering 2 Android OS upgrades, so Android 13 then Android 14 beyond that, and 3 MiUI launcher upgrades as well, which is pretty respectable. Of course, you may well end up hanging around waiting for those upgrades to actually drop, and as for security updates, not exactly sure how timely those are going to be, but at least there's some commitments going on now. The edge-mounted fingerprint sensor is alright. Occasionally it took a couple of pokes to work, and you got no chance if your fingers are damp or sticky for whatever reason. We don't judge here. And you've always got face recognition as a backup if you need it. My review model of the Poco F4 was the 128 gig version, and I gotta say that storage is filling up remarkably fast with all of the various apps and media that I have downloaded. So it is kind of annoying that there's no support for microSD memory cards here on the Poco F4 when you do finally run out of space, but you do always have the option of just bunging more cash at Poco for the upgraded 256 gig model if you think you're gonna be shooting a lot of video, downloading a lot of media, all that kind of shenanigans. Now, most mid-range phones over £300 these days come packing a slick AMOLED screen, and the Poco F4 doesn't disappoint there. This 6.67-inch Full HD display is proper eye candy, boasting supremely sharp contrast as well as full HDR10+ and Dolby Vision support. I have very much enjoyed watching shows and movies on this thing, even for hours at a time when I was sat around at an airport, for instance. No complaints on the brightness front either. It's scaled up and down automatically absolutely perfectly well, whether I was outside in bright sunshine or inside in a dimly lit environment. And on that maximum brightness, everything remained clearly legible even on one of those bright sunshiny days. And the refresh rate maxes out at 120 Hz. You can just leave it on dynamic so it will scale up to that when you are viewing supported content. Otherwise, you can also manually tweak it if you like. And the Poco F4's stereo speaker setup is absolutely fine as well, although I almost always had my headphones hooked up over Bluetooth 5.2. And I did notice a little bit of a crackling that will break up in the audio whenever I hibernated the smartphone while streaming via Bluetooth, but apart from that, it's been flawless performance, even when I've been in a very densely packed area, absolutely swamped with other human beings. Ugh. And of course, it would have been nice to have a headphone jack option on this thing, but hey-ho, bollocks to the lot of it. Now, while the Poco F4 GT model is powered by Qualcomm's mighty Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, Poco went with the older 870 for the regular F4, the same chipset found in last year's model, backed here by 6 gigs of DDR5 RAM. And yeah, it was kind of disappointing when they rolled out the specs list and I saw it was the 870 yet again, but to be fair, it's perfectly fine for pretty much everything you'd need. All of my apps ran absolutely perfectly, no stumbles or judders, and certainly no crashes or any other performance issues like that. And if you do want to get a bit of gaming on the go, well, no worries there either. The likes of Genshin Impact, if you do really push it, try and bump up the detail levels and such forth, and you will see judders in the performance, little drops in the frame rate. Well, just keep it at more sensible levels and it'll run absolutely perfectly, even if you're gaming for a good hour or two, thanks to the Liquid Cool Tech 2.0 with its big old vapor chamber, just helping to keep all that nasty heat churning out away from the innards. And yes, you've got all of those magnificent game turbo features with the new and improved layout, so it's easier to find what you need. And you can do anything in here, from boosting the performance when needed, clearing the memory if you find the game struggling a bit, changing the display settings, just all kinds of stuff. You've got full 5G support, of course, courtesy of that Snapdragon 870 chipset, but I found that mobile streaming wasn't quite as smooth and responsive here on the Poco F4 versus some recent rivals from the likes of Samsung, like the Galaxy A53. But you've also got Wi-Fi 6 support and certainly no complaints there whatsoever for downloading massive movies or whopping great frickin' apps. I'm looking at you, Genshin Impact. And as for the battery life, well, you've got a 4,500 mAh capacity cell crammed inside of here, slightly smaller than some other recent Poco phones like the X4 GT and the F4 GT. But no worries at all, if you're not a crazy ultra demanding user, then you'll easily make it through a full day on a single charge. I tended to get around 6 to 7 hours of screen on time from a full charge, and that includes some audio streaming in the background as well. And the battery drain when that screen is off is minimal indeed. And if you do find you need to give it a quick boost at any point, well, it supports 67 watt turbocharging with the bundled adapter as well. So just bung that lead in and you'll have enough power to last you through the evening if you find that it is wiped for whatever reason. Unfortunately, no wireless charging support here on the Poco F4, but it's still a reasonably rare feature at this sort of mid-range price. So let's end this merry wee jig with a squint at the camera tech, and like the Poco F4 GT model, you once again have a 64 meg main camera sensor with optical image stabilization to help out with your low light snaps. A few of my shots taken indoors, for instance, came out quite soft and warm, and things can still get pretty fuzzy if your subject isn't completely still. But overall, the Poco F4 performed admirably for a mid-range mobile. In better lighting, I got some pretty vivid photos with striking colour reproduction, but nothing too phony, thankfully. Blue skies in particular come out really well, so it's just a shame we don't see them more often here in the UK. No complaints with the amount of detail packed into every frame either, despite the pixel binning. Photos still look crisp enough when you check them out on an oversized monitor. And I really enjoyed the results I got from the portrait mode as well, which doesn't bulk up very often at all. An 8 megapixel ultra-wide angle shooter is also available on the back end of the Poco F4 if you want to add a bit of drama to your shot, or you simply just can't fit everything into frame. The detail levels aren't as fine, colours take a bit of a hit, and the ultra-wide does struggle more in lower light, but it's all pretty typical for a mid-range mobile. And also, like most other mid-range mobiles, the final lens in that triple lens setup isn't a telephoto shooter, it's your bog standard basic 2 megapixel macro shooter. Way! But using the primary camera, you do have a 64 meg max resolution mode that you can swap to and then crop into your photos to get a sort of fake zoom effect. It's obviously not as good, but it does work in a pinch if the lighting isn't cack. And it goes pretty standard with Poco and Xiaomi smartphones. You've got a sackload of other bonus camera modes you can play around with, including a full-on pro mode with RAW support if that's your bag. Plus there's a video mode naturally, which can capture clips at up to 4K resolution at either 30 or 60 frames per second. In low light the results ain't too hot, lots of focal pop and noise to contend with, but the Poco F4 again copes pretty well with strong light and sharp contrast. Image stabilization is decent at the 4K setting, there's not too much shake when you are moving and shooting at the same time, and the audio pickup is absolutely fine as well. As for the F4's 20 meg selfie shooter, well, that's alright. I got the occasional saturated pic when I was shooting outside if I wasn't too careful with my angles, but the camera can generally deal well with strong contrast. And again, colours are warm indoors and you want to keep as still as possible in low light so things don't get too blurry, but apart from that, all good. And you can shoot full HD video if you want to using that selfie cam. I certainly had no complaints when I was Skyping or Zooming with this smartphone. No one was complaining that they couldn't hear me properly or they couldn't see me properly either. Again, deals pretty well with quite strong contrast on occasion, and in quite low light it's not terrible either. So that in a nutshell is the fresh new Poco F4 mid-range mobile with some flagship-y style specs. And I gotta say, a lot of mid-range mobiles in 2022 are getting a little bit dull. They're not really massive upgrades over the previous offerings, the likes of Samsung's Galaxy A53 and the OnePlus Nord 2T. And the Poco F4 is certainly no different, so if you've already got the previous gen, the Poco F3, there is no compelling reason here to upgrade whatsoever. In fact, in some respects, the design, for instance, is a bit of a step backwards. That said, if your blower's getting on a bit and you want a replacement, the Poco F4 is definitely an option worth considering at this price point. It's a solid all-rounder. I enjoyed using it as my handset for this past week or so, and it's, you know, pretty strong competition for the likes of that OnePlus Nord 2T and the Galaxy A53. Though I gotta say, I'd have a bit of a scout around online first and see if I could get the Poco F3 for a much nicer price before committing to the F4. So there you go, that's my Poco F4 review. It'd be great to hear what you guys think down in the comments below. Please do poke subscribe, ding that notifications bell, and have yourselves a ruddy good rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you!